Hello, Light Pathers. Welcome back to the podcast. I really appreciate you being here to spend some time together today to go within, to get really curious about what's going on for us personally and collectively. And today's topic, as you will see in the title of this episode, is of a saying. And that is for me to really unpack this concept of let go or be dragged. And what inspired this podcast episode is that recently I went on Instagram stories and I was talking about an experience I had just had that really was a little bit confronting for me. And that this saying was something that I had literally read that day before having this experience. And so it was such a big lesson. And the reason I'm bringing this, I guess, Insta story conversation to the pod is because so many of you responded to that story. Like, it hit a nerve with our community in a really good way, in a really reflective way, and in a way that I think a lot of us are reflecting on how not letting go is actually really, really holding us back. So I thought that there was just more scope here to discuss it, to talk about it, to unpack it, and maybe to apply this concept or this idea into our lives in order to do exactly what it says on the packet at the Light Path Collective, to make it just that little bit lighter to walk. So for those of you that didn't catch the story on Insta Stories, I was just going about my normal Tuesday morning routine, a little personal insight into my life here. Every Tuesday morning I get up early and I hop online and I sit with clients often that are on the other side of the world just because of time difference. I dedicate a couple of mornings a week to getting up really early to see clients because I see you from all over the world. And so like any other morning, I had done that. I then take the opportunity just to sneak out and do a weekly, I do it a couple of times a week, yoga class. And then I quickly rush back home and get ready for an afternoon of readings. So this Tuesday morning was going along like any other Tuesday mornings. I got up really early. I was checking socials. I saw this saying, let go or be dragged. And I was like, that hits. But obviously just had to get on with my day and did so. Saw a couple of clients and got in the car to take myself to yoga. Now, when I got to yoga, I couldn't find a parking spot. I go to yoga. If you're from Sydney, I go to yoga in Potts Point, so parking is shocking. So often if I don't get a park, I obviously just have to miss my class. So couldn't find a park, I missed the class, but because I'm so good at surrender, which by the way, surrender and letting go or be dragged, similar, but not exactly the same. And when I thought about doing this episode, I actually thought that surrender needed its own reflection. So I've got a whole other episode on the art of surrender because I think it's one of those spiritual concepts we don't talk about that much. So that episode will be like one or two after this one. So this is just kind of like a aspect of surrender, but it's not actually me talking about through the energetics or the spirituality of surrender. But I have recorded that one for you. So that will come up after these guys, or after this one, when it's time. So because I'm good at surrender it's a skill, it's a practice that you have to master, or the art of learning it. So instead of getting huffy or I didn't get my own way, I thought to myself, well, actually, I could use this hour to quickly run up to the shops to run an errand that I needed to run. And so I took that opportunity and off I went up to the shops. And as I got out of the car and I was walking into the shops, walking out of the shops was a woman that I have not seen for about 4 years. And she's a woman I used to work with. And this woman is, I believe, like all of us, just out in the world, trying to do her best with everything that she has. And so this is nothing necessarily personal to her. But I will say that she was awful to me. She was just not her best self with me and caused me personally and professionally a lot of grief. So much so that the actions and words that she took and spoke to me in our time working together were really quite traumatic. And I have spent a long time decompressing and learning how to let go a lot of what I did go through in my past career. And part of that was interactions with this woman. So we could call that trauma, we could call that baggage or whatever. I don't really care what it's called. I just cared for the fact that I went through it. And I'm sure we all have those people, those situations in our lives that really, quite frankly, just knock us about. And so it's been a few years since I've been in that environment. Almost like 4 years now. And even though I think this woman lives in my area, I've never run into her in all this time since I left that work environment. I've never bumped into her. I've never crossed paths with her. And again, this isn't about her so much because I'm sure I've been her for other people in my life. You know, I've been the trigger. I've been the trauma unintentionally. Like I like to imagine that she has it, but for whatever reason, you know, I have been that. So I just want to acknowledge that this isn't about this person, but rather it's about what it really incited and really, I guess for want of a better word, what it really triggered in me. And I think that there's I heard this other saying the other day, actually, that it's not your fault. So the things that she chose to do or the things that she chose to say weren't necessarily my fault. Maybe some of them were, I don't know. But let's just say, like, you know, people don't say really horrible things to you. Like, that's not your fault, right? It's not your fault, but it is my problem. And it was definitely my problem. These are experiences that definitely had me really having to heal, really having to seek something within myself to learn to live with it. But I think without 4 years that have gone by since I've run into this woman, I think time has been maybe more of a healer than really understanding the process or the whys of what happened. And so on this morning, when I surrendered to the fact that I couldn't go to my yoga class, I went to this particular shop I don't usually go to, or this place I don't usually go to, and I walk in and she's walking out. And so the first time in 4 years I crossed paths with her. So of course, straight away, anxiety is rife within my body. The physical symptoms of pulse racing, like shortness of breath, nervousness. I walked into the shop, I was a bit disorientated. I didn't really know what to do because it's shocking, because to see that person that, as far as I'm concerned, it's just my opinion, it's just my perspective, it doesn't mean it's true, but my perspective is this person that caused me this trauma, I'd finally, you know, walked past her. Obviously we didn't say hello, we just walked past each other, pretended like neither of us existed. But I was triggered. And that's when I remembered that quote that I had somehow read that morning that had popped up randomly on my social media feed of let go or be dragged. And you can't help but stop and softly smile and know that how beautiful that on the level of the soul, I was clearly seeking this healing, this release. And clearly the timing was right for me to have it, that it was going to be an achievable task. That whatever work I had done to heal from the trauma that was trapped in my body, or the hurt and the pain and the fear as a result of my interactions with her, I had done all I could do. Time had passed. I guess it weakens, you know, its power weakens. But then to run into that person again, it's like running into your ex, you know? It got triggered, or it came all up again. And so how perfect order, as we know, nothing is by accident. I clearly called in that truth onto my social media page. It's how it managed to manifest. Unbeknownst to me, this is not a conscious thing, obviously. But there I was, okay, I've got a choice here. I could either let this go or I can continue to be dragged by it. And it wasn't until I was reflecting on it later that day that I realized how often I do this and how often I see other people do this in their lives, that our willingness to hold on to so much keeps us not paralyzed, not stagnant. It actually keeps us being dragged. And I had to make a disciplined, a very loving, and a conscious choice of letting it go, because I was done being dragged by it. I was done feeling anxious at the thought of her or seeing her having that physical reaction. I'm done not really feeling like I was justifiably seen or that justice wasn't served in that situation. I'm done holding on to it could have been any different. And if you would have heard me, I think I've done a whole podcast episode on forgiveness. And for those of you that follow me on social media, I often come back to this concept of forgiveness. And let go or be dragged really feeds into this understanding I have about forgiveness. Growing up, we're taught forgive means to act like it didn't happen, to let it go and to be friends again and to be in contact again. It's definitely how we coach little kids to forgive, say sorry, now off you go, hold hands, be friends. And taking that into adulthood, sometimes it's just not possible. I will never be this woman's friend because of the trauma inflicted on me as a result of her actions. I don't wish her bad. In fact, I wish her well. God, I wish her happiness and love and all the things. Most of all, I wish her peace. I wish her success. I wish her all the good things. A relationship with me, I absolutely do not wish. So in forgiveness, it's accepting things couldn't be any different. And if we're not in that place of acceptance, then we will continue to be dragged by it. And the more I thought about this in my life, the more I saw how often I hold on to things due to the feeling of injustice or incompletion, or that my needs weren't met. And so mentally, I will hold on to it in the hopes that somehow I can make sense of this. And all that's happening is I'm just being dragged. I'm not getting the clarity. I'm not getting any better. I'm just being dragged by the weight of what I'm not willing to accept. A very dear friend of mine is currently going through a really upsetting breakup. It's not a breakup that she desired, and it's a breakup that, in her perception, feels very unnecessary. And she's doing exactly what I have done many times before right now, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this. She's ruminating over all that this person has said to her, how this person has acted towards her. She's trying to get some type of logical conclusion as to how they ended up in this situation, some type of justification. She's willing herself to understand his perception or his decision in a way that makes her feel in agreement with the situation or the breakup. Like and I say that with so much love because we've all done that. But here I can actively see it happening. The one thing that will free her, she's refusing to do. She's refusing to let go, and as a result, she is being dragged. She's being dragged through her days in sadness. She's being dragged through the mental trauma of trying to figure out somebody else's thought process purely because she's refusing to let it go. And because letting it go means death to her dream of being in this relationship. So I completely understand why she doesn't want to let it go. But because she doesn't want to let it go, she's being dragged. And my fear for her, as it was my fear for myself, by not letting this situation go and being dragged by it was it was becoming mine, and it was becoming my perception of myself. It was becoming maybe a little bit of a ruminating obsession, like thinking about it over and over again, replaying situations back over and over and over again. And every time I thought about it, I'd be just as hurt as she's going through now with this relationship situation. But letting it go would have felt like defeat, and it would have felt like I wasn't healed from it. When ironically, letting it go was the only way I could be healed from it, because I would be free from it. I'm not saying that there isn't a lot to learn in these situations and that we should spend time really thinking about it. But thinking about it isn't grieving it. Thinking about it isn't allowing ourselves to be sad that it happened. It's actually keeping us really trapped. We're being dragged through the experience again. Now, as we know, our mind, our brain, when it has a thought, whether that thought is true, whether that thought is actually present reality, our subconscious and our body doesn't know the difference. So every time I thought about this situation, every time I gave it my attention in terms of being upset about it or angry about it or trying to be justified in my role in it or whatever it was, my brain was signaling to my consciousness that I was still in the situation. I was stuck in that trauma. I was stuck in the pain of it because my mind was just convinced I was just in as much danger for pain and hurt in that moment. And it dragged me. It weighed me down. It forces you to make choices and decisions based on it, whether to avoid it happening again or in spite of it, all those things. We've all been in our own version of this personal hell. And I guess I wanted to bring this conversation to the pod to give us all, me included, another option, because there is another option. And that other option is that sovereignty and that choice, that we can choose to let it go because we no longer wish to be dragged by it. So if you're struggling with something right now, if you're going through a similar type of situation where you just can't let something go, know that what you're seeking may not exist. It doesn't matter what my friend's partner says to her or ex-partner says to her now. The fact remains that they're broken up. Even if what that person has to say to her is, let's get back together, doesn't change the fact that she's been through this and that things have changed. There's nothing this woman could have said to me. There's actually nothing she could say to me that will change the fact that I went through what I went through. Me holding on to it is now just me actually hurting myself. So the most loving thing I can do for me, and if it's loving as a result for her, is to let it go, because I love myself enough not to be dragged by it. I love myself enough to be really honest with myself and to know that not everything's going to go my way. I'm loving enough with myself to know that people are going to say really horrible things to me and about me. True or not, doesn't really matter. They're horrible. But I can choose. I'm the one that is actually in the autonomous position to let it go, because I do not want to be dragged by the decision, by the choices of others. So I'm just going to leave that there as an invitation, maybe something to think about that will allow you to come to a place of strength and peace more quickly than you otherwise would have, or more effectively than we're often otherwise taught. If you want to hear more on forgiveness, scroll back through the episodes, because there is an episode on forgiveness, and that might help. And keep an eye out or an ear out for the conversation coming up about the art of surrender and actually what that really means. It's a spiritual concept, like I said, that's thrown out there, but do we actually know what it means and, more importantly, how to do it? I'm going to give you some tips on surrender coming up. For now, as always, thank you so much for joining me in this episode, but also thank you so much for joining me on socials. I love the chats we have on socials. I think a lot of car rants, I'm often in the car just talking to you, processing things. I know one topic, I wanted to bring it to a car rant, and then I started talking to someone about it, and they said, I think you need to bring this to the pod. And I was like, yeah, I think I do. This is bigger than a car rant. So listen out for more of those, because I love the interactions we have around those. But for now, as always, thanks for listening. Thank you for your support. And I hope that this sharing of ideas has helped lighten your path just that little bit more.